Every empire that borrowed against tomorrow collapsed on schedule. The pattern never changes. Only the names do. In 1694, England was bankrupt. 9 years of war against France had drained the treasury. The government owed more than it could ever repay. Tax revenues couldn't cover interest payments. Credit was gone. The kingdom was weeks from default. William III needed a solution. Not reform, not austerity. He needed a trick. A group of merchants offered one. They would lend the crown £1.2 million. In exchange, they wanted a charter, a monopoly, the right to issue paper notes backed by government debt, the right to create money from nothing, as long as the government promised to pay them back. The king agreed. The Bank of England was born. The mechanics were simple. The government borrowed. The bank lent. The loan became a bond. The bond became collateral. The collateral became currency. Paper notes circulated as money, even though they were just promises backed by taxes that hadn't been collected yet. Taxes on people not yet born. The system worked because everyone believed it would. Belief became value. Value became power. Power became permanent. This wasn't the first time in 1340. Florence was the financial center of Europe. The Bardi and Peruzzi families controlled the money supply. They lent to kings. Kings borrowed to fight wars. Wars required more loans. The cycle fed itself. Edward III of England owed the Florentine banks over 1 million florins. The debt financed his claim to the French throne. The 100 Years' War depended on borrowed gold. In 1345, Edward defaulted. He couldn't pay. The Bardi and Peruzzi collapsed within months. Florence lost half its banks. The shockwave spread across Europe. Credit froze. Trade slowed. The financial center of the continent nearly vanished. But the system didn't die. It migrated. The lesson wasn't to stop lending. The lesson was to make the debt too big to fail. By the 17th century, the Dutch perfected the model. Amsterdam became the new hub. The Dutch East India Company issued shares. Shares became tradable. A secondary market formed. Speculation followed. Prices inflated beyond the value of the ships and spices. The tulip mania of 1637 was just a rehearsal. The real bubble was always in credit. The Dutch invented futures contracts, debt instruments, options, ways to bet on bets. The financial system grew more complex, more abstract, more detached from physical goods. Money became a game of promises layered on promises. Then the British took the model and weaponized it. The Bank of England didn't just finance wars. It financed empire. The Napoleonic Wars, the expansion into India, the suppression of rebellion. Every conquest required capital. Capital required debt. Debt required a lender willing to create. Money on demand. By 1815, Britain's national debt had grown to 260% of GDP, the largest peacetime debt in history. The economy should have collapsed. It didn't. The debt was never meant to be repaid. It was meant to be refinanced forever. The genius of the system was this: the government didn't need to find money. It needed to find belief. As long as people believed the bonds were good, the bonds were good. As long as the currency circulated, the currency worked. Reality became optional. Perception was everything. That confidence was the first crack. In 1923, Germany tried the same trick without the empire. The Weimar Republic printed money to pay war reparations. The printing press ran day and night. Marks flooded the system. Prices doubled every few days. A loaf of bread cost millions, then billions, then trillions. Hyperinflation wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. The government couldn't tax its way out. It couldn't borrow its way out. So it printed. The debt disappeared in the inflation. The savings disappeared too. The middle class was wiped out. The currency became worthless. The Reichsbank collapsed. The financial system reset. But the political damage was permanent. Desperation breeds extremism. Extremism breeds war. War breeds more debt. The cycle always completes. After World War II, the Bretton Woods system tried to prevent another collapse. Currencies were pegged to the dollar. The dollar was pegged to gold. $35 per ounce. Fixed, stable, guaranteed. For 25 years, it worked. Then the United States spent too much on Vietnam and domestic programs. The gold reserves couldn't back the dollars in circulation. Other countries started converting dollars to gold. The reserves drained. In 1971, Nixon closed the gold window. The peg was severed. The dollar became fiat, money backed by nothing but faith in the issuing government. Every other currency followed. The entire global system became a web of promises with no anchor. That's when the debt truly exploded. Without the gold constraint, governments could borrow without limit. Central banks could print without limit. The financial system became a lever. Pull it, and the economy grows. Pull it harder, and the economy booms. Pull it forever, and eventually, something breaks. No one noticed the collapse had already started. In 2008, the lever snapped. American banks had issued trillions in subprime mortgages. Mortgages bundled into securities. Securities sold as safe investments. Investments backed by homes people couldn't afford. The whole structure was debt stacked on debt. When housing prices stopped rising, the defaults began. The securities lost value. Banks couldn't cover their positions. Lehman Brothers collapsed. Credit markets froze. The global economy nearly stopped. Governments responded the only way they knew how. They borrowed more. Central banks printed more. The Federal Reserve expanded its balance sheet from $900 billion to $4.5 trillion in 6 years. The European Central Bank followed. The Bank of Japan followed. China followed. The debt didn't shrink. It metastasized. By 2020, global debt exceeded $180 trillion. More than 3 times global GDP. Governments owed 30% of that. Corporations owed 30%. Households owed 20%. Financial institutions owed the rest. The pandemic accelerated everything. Governments borrowed trillions to keep economies alive. Central banks printed trillions to buy the bonds. Debt to GDP ratios hit wartime levels. The United States crossed 130%. Japan crossed to 160%. Italy, Greece, Lebanon, Argentina, Venezuela all drowning in obligations they couldn't meet. Lebanon's currency collapsed in 2019. The banks froze accounts. Depositors couldn't access their savings. The lira lost 90% of its value in 2 years. Electricity failed. Medicine shortages spread. The middle class vanished. The system imploded. Sri Lanka followed in. 2022, sovereign default. Currency collapse, protests, government overthrow. The same pattern, the same ending. The modern system is still the Bank of England's invention. Debt as currency. Currency as power. Power as control. Every government runs the same playbook. Borrow to fund spending. Print to service debt. Inflate to erase obligations. The burden transfers. From the state to the citizen, savings lose value. Wages stagnate. Assets inflate. The wealthy hold assets. The poor hold cash. Inflation is a silent tax, a transfer mechanism hidden in monetary policy. Central banks call it quantitative easing. Governments call it stimulus. Economists call it necessary. The result is the same. Wealth concentrates. Inequality widens. Trust erodes. The system survives on belief. Belief that the bonds will pay. Belief that the currency holds value. Belief that the institutions are stable. When belief breaks, everything breaks. History shows the pattern. Rome debased its currency to fund the legions. The silver content of the denarius dropped from 95% to 5% over 3 centuries. Soldiers were paid in worthless coins. Trade collapsed. The empire fragmented. Spain flooded Europe with American silver in the 16th century. Prices quintupled. The value of money plummeted. Spain declared bankruptcy 9 times in 150 years. The Habsburgs lost their empire. France issued paper assignats during the Revolution, backed by confiscated church lands. The printing accelerated. The assignats became worthless. Napoleon restored the gold franc. Stability returned only after the currency died. The Soviet Union collapsed under the weight of its own lies. The ruble was fake. The prices were fake. The economy was fake. When the system opened, the illusion shattered. Hyperinflation followed. Savings evaporated. Oligarchs seized the assets. Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Argentina. Turkey each repeated the cycle. Borrow, print, inflate, collapse. The names change. The pattern doesn't. The question isn't whether the current system will collapse. The question is when. And who will hold the debt when it does? The answer is always the same. The public holds the debt. The state survives. The people pay. The Bank of England's invention wasn't currency. It was a mechanism to transfer the cost of collapse from the powerful to the powerless. Debt is a tool of control. It binds future generations to decisions made decades ago. It locks citizens into systems they didn't choose and can't escape. The genius was making it. Invisible, most people don't see the debt. They see jobs, wages, prices, taxes. They don't see the compounding interest, the inflation, the slow erosion of purchasing power. The theft happens quietly, over decades, inside the monetary system itself. The collapse won't look like a crash. It will look like stagnation. Growth slowing. Wages stagnating. Prices rising. Standards of living declining. The middle class shrinking. Social trust fraying. Institutions losing legitimacy. It's already happening.